It's good! It's actually good! My apologies go out to everyone who didn't see my Batman vs. Superman review from last year and you have no idea what this opening gag is referencing. Probably wasn't a smart idea for me to open this with a giant mislead that relied on you watching a previous video of mine. But the movie's really good. Well, after 4 tries, DC has finally made a movie about a superhero who feels like a superhero. They finally have made a movie about a hero who wants to save people rather than acting like it's a giant burden and the most depressing thing in the world. I'm sorry, I should not be starting off my review by bad-mouthing DC, but it did kind of need to be said because this week, Wonder Woman finally came to theaters, and it is not only a film that steers DC back in the right direction and corrects so many of the mistakes of the past, it's also just a legit good movie. Again, it feels weird that I have to clarify that at the beginning of the review, but let's be honest, the DC films at this point have a track record almost on par with the Transformers films, so yeah, I kind of did need to come in here and start the review off by saying that. It's good. Sorry, force of habit. I'm not here to badmouth DC today, because after Wonder Woman, they've totally earned themselves a victory lap. They are totally allowed to spike that ball and do a little end zone dance right now, because Wonder Woman succeeds. And let's be honest, out of all the movies that they have planned, of which there are like 9 more ones every single week, Wonder Woman is the film that needed to succeed the most. Even more than Justice League, Wonder Woman is the one that needed to be a hit because after so many bad movies, they need to come in here and prove to us they can do a film right. And also, Wonder Woman is one of the most underrepresented heroes in the world and she means so much to so many people. She's the one they needed to get right and they got it right. Mostly. I do have a few small problems with it, and we will get into that later, but for now, let's talk about what this movie is about. It's the story of Diana, who grew up on Themyscira, the island of the Amazons that were created by Zeus and kept hidden from man's world. But when pilot Steve Trevor crash lands down and explains to them that outside of their island, the world is at war. The biggest war of all time. A war to end all wars. And when Diana hears this, she believes that it must be the work of Ares, the god of war. So she sets off with Steve as she attempts to stop World War I and learns about how strange and different man's world really is. So basically, it's 1 part fish out of water story, 1 part superhero story, and 1 part war story. And the amazing thing is that this works on each of those levels. I know that a lot of people are saying that works because of Gal Gadot, saying that her charisma is what really sells this film, and I'll get into her in just a second, but to me, the person who needs the most applause is Patty Jenkins, the director, because being able to capture that many different tones is not easy, but being able to capture each of them in the same film and making them each work hand in hand with each other so that nothing feels out of place is nothing short of stunning. The work that she did on this film to make everything flow from one theme into the next and make everything coexist and make these characters feel so dynamic and alive, that's breathtaking to me, and it makes me really excited for what her next film is going to be. She's already signed on to direct Wonder Woman 2, which automatically makes me more excited for that film than anything else in the DC cinematic universe. But it wasn't just her. It was also the cinematographer, the set designer, the editor. You can tell that everybody who was working on this film shared one common vision for what it should be. Up to a point, but I'll get into that in just a moment. But for now, I really want to focus on the cinematographer because we have to talk about how this film feels different from its cinematic universe brothers. Because this film starts off in the present day, and it does kind of have that washed out, faded look of Batman vs. Superman and Man of Steel, and I'm not gonna lie to you, when I saw that, I kind of gulped and thought, oh god, not again. But then it flashes back to Themyscira. And oh my god, colors! Freaking colors! The sun actually shines in this movie! Everything seems bright and alive and vibrant. And then when she moves from Themyscira to man's world, everything becomes gray and depressing and washed out and bland looking again. Even more than it was in Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman. This is the grayest cinematography I've ever seen, but it serves a purpose. It's there to show you how different a World at War is from Paradise Island. In here, these drab, bland colors actually serve a purpose rather than just being there to put you to sleep. Okay. Listen. You know how I said I shouldn't be talking smack about the other DC films and I was gonna try and not do that? Yeah, the more I talk about this film, the more I realize I'm not going to be able to keep that promise. I have to bring up those other films because we have to point out how this film succeeds where those ones failed. So if you are a fan of Batman vs. Superman or Man of Steel, just walk away now. Just know I like this film. I'm going to praise it. I'm going to give it a high score. So if you are mad about me never liking anything from DC, you can't be mad anymore, because I like this film. This one's good. Yay. Now let's get into this crap. This film doesn't just have colors, it has life. Everywhere you go, it actually feels like people live there. When Diana has to go and rescue a town, it doesn't feel like she's just fighting against a big green screen where nobody else exists. It feels like she is actually rescuing people. When she's on Themyscira, it feels like the whole island is alive with rich, diverse characters. When she goes to London to see the contrast of people suffering, you actually feel like those people live there and that they're suffering because of the conditions around them. And speaking of seeing the way that everyone around Wonder Woman is feeling, that's another thing that I have to point out. In this film, you will actually see people feeling! People in this film actually have emotions! They emote! You know, like humans do! Amazing concept! In this film, Diana and Steve and Etta Candy don't just spend the entire film staring off into the distance, speaking in that one single monotone voice, because it makes it seem like they're dealing with really important stuff, but instead it's just not the way that normal people would ever actually behave. In this film, they actually change their behavior and their tone and the way that they speak, depending on the situation. You know, like actual people would.
Acting! Brilliant! Thank you! Thank you!
Seriously, kudos to all the actresses and actors in this film, but I really feel like you could have just taken all their names off the posters and instead just listed on there the sun, colors, and emotions, because I was more surprised to see any of them show up in this film than any other actor. But I don't want anybody out there thinking that I'm applying this film simply because the other DC films have set the bar so low you could walk over it at this point. No, I'm applying this thing because it's good. Not good for DC, not good compared to Man of Steel, not good just simply because it had colors and sunlight in it. No, it's good. Like, legit, well-made movie good. And I already applaud Patty Jenkins and the rest of the crew saying that they brought so much to this film. However, a lot of what makes this film great is the story itself, because this story is not only full of a ton of heart, it captures so much of what a Wonder Woman origin story should be, and it actually does get rather complex at times. This whole story is about Wonder Woman leaving Themyscira because she believes that if she kills Ares, she will end all war and the Earth will become a paradise. And spoiler alert, that ain't how things work out. And this is a great journey for her as she slowly starts to see how corrupt and sinister Man's world is, and as she does, she starts to learn maybe it's not Ares, maybe this world is just screwed up. Gal Gadot actually captures that charming sense of innocence that Wonder Woman should have, because when she comes in there and says, well, why don't you guys just do this? Why don't you just get along and work together? Why don't you just go here and stop this guy? Why don't you go straight to this objective? And then everybody has to come in and explain to her, yeah, well, that's not really the way that it works. We have to go through all these different systems to make that happen, and we have these problems with these other people, and we can't make that work out. And us as the audience, an audience that also just wants to see problems get resolved and just wants to see everyone come together, she speaks to that innocence inside all of us because we're sitting there going, yeah man, why can't you just do it that way? Why can't you do things the Wonder Woman way? Why can't her solution work out in this situation? Because wouldn't it be so much better if it actually did? And yeah, she does kind of speak to that innocent child inside all of us who just wants there to be peace in the world when she comes in here and says, if I can just slay this big monster, then everything works out. Then everyone stops fighting. Because yeah, we all want there to be one big bad guy out there, and if you take them out, then everything is resolved and everyone can be happy. But we know that's not the case, and that's the lesson that she has to learn throughout this film, and it is kind of crushing to see her have to come to that realization. And they actually capture many of these themes perfectly by setting this film during World War I. Now, I know a lot of people out there have been asking why did they say it during World War II, and the first reason for that is because Captain America kind of already did it. But the other far more important reasons are because World War I was called the Great War. Because when it came around, the world had never seen anything like that before. It was something that engulfed the whole planet. It was the war to end all wars. And in this film, Diana wants to kill Ares so she can stop all wars. That's kind of the perfect war to set this during. But also, if you set it during World War II, the villains are going to be Nazis. And don't get me wrong, I'm fine with seeing Wonder Woman come in here and punch a bunch of Nazis. That's something that never gets old. However, as I said, you set it during World War II, the villain are Nazis. You set it during World War I, the villain is war itself. But also, we the movie-going audiences, we've seen World War II. We have seen a ton of films set during that time period, so we kind of feel like we know it already. However, we haven't seen that many films set during World War I, so because of that, the concept of World War I and the time periods and all the history around it and the culture at that time is as foreign to us as it is to Diana herself. So when she goes in there and she is shocked to see how everything is just falling apart and how sexist society is, we're kind of shocked at it too. We're kind of right there with her. And I half jokingly complimented this film because their characters existed, but I was kind of serious about that. Every single character in here, even just some of Steve Trevor's buddies who in another film just would have been throwaway characters that you don't really delve into, even they felt like three-dimensional characters. Don't get me wrong, it doesn't work with everybody. Not everybody in here is great. And that brings me to what is hands down going to be the most unpopular opinion of this entire review. I'm still not sold on Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman. Don't get me wrong, she's way better in this film than she was in Batman vs. Superman, but if you saw my Batman vs. Superman review, you'll know that's because to me, she was kind of just playing Catwoman in that film rather than Wonder Woman. However, in this film, yeah, she is actually Wonder Woman. She does have some amazing butt-kicking action sequences. Again, kudos to Patty Jenkins on doing an amazing job directing those. And whenever she has to be charming, whenever she has to capture that innocence and that sense of just wanting everybody to get along, she does that very well. However, again, maybe it's just me, but whenever she had to get serious, or whenever she just sat down and was talking with her colleagues, it felt kind of flat to me. You know what she is? You know what she reminds me of? She's kind of the modern day Schwarzenegger. Remember back in the early 80s when Schwarzenegger was this big breakout star because he could kick all kinds of butt and also he could deliver some amazing catchphrases and he was just oozing with charisma whenever he needed to be? But in all of his movies, whenever he had to just sit down and talk to someone, he just kind of sounded like a robot. And granted, half the time he was just playing a robot, but whenever he was playing a human, again, it was just like, yeah, you're not doing the best job at that. That's kind of what she is. When she has to kick butt, whenever she has to crack a joke, whenever she has to deliver a one-liner, she's awesome. Whenever she's just chatting with people, I just didn't really buy it. But, you know, again, as I said, I know that's just me, and even then, I'm comparing her to 1980 Schwarzenegger. That's not exactly that much of a critique. That's still kind of a compliment. So yeah, that one's kind of a half critique. I do have my problems, but I can ignore those problems and just focus on the good. However, there are some problems that I just can't ignore. There are some problems that have to be pointed out because while this film succeeds in so many ways, when it screws up, yeah, oh boy, it screws up. And the first screw up that I have to point out is her powers in this film. And that's not me as a comic book fan coming in here and going, oh, well, her powers aren't like they are in the comics. That's me as a comic book fan coming in here and going, are they like they are in the comics? I don't know, because you never actually stopped to tell us about them. Listen, in every single superhero film out there, you have to explain how they got their powers and what their powers are. However, you can ignore that first one if how they get their powers is meant to be a mystery, and without spoiling anything, it is kind of meant to be a mystery in this one, so I'm fine with you ignoring that one. However, you have to let us know what their powers are so that we, the audience, can understand the stakes. We can understand when they're being pushed to their limits. We can understand what they could use in this situation based on the powers that we've seen to help them out of a situation, and we don't just keep getting brand new powers out of every single scene. This film never actually explains what her powers are. We see her training, so we know that she knows how to fight, but then one day she just bangs her armbands together and then blam, giant explosion, and nobody talks about it. They're just kind of like, something's going on over here. We gotta get off camera right now. We can't be here right now. And then the next day, she punches her hands through some rocks, and rather than being like, what is this? Do I have super strength? She just looks at her hands like, huh, and then keeps punching her hands into rocks, and that's the last mention of that. Yeah, they never ever in this film actually explain what her powers are, so when we see her going into battle, don't get me wrong, the battles are awesome. There is some amazing sequences in here. However, when she's supposed to be getting pushed to her limits, I don't really know if she's being pushed to her limits. I mean, there's like a moment where she flips over a tank, and I was actually kind of shocked because I didn't think she was that strong at that point. And then towards the end of this film, I'll be totally honest with you, she just starts pulling out brand new powers out of nowhere during the very end of this. Yeah, man, you need to come in here and explain to us that she actually has powers and what they might be. I mean, heck, I mentioned that she has super strength. We never actually see her strength compared to the other Amazons, and because of that, I'm just left here going, so is she like different from the other Amazons, or can all of them do this? Is it just an entire island full of like superhuman people, or is it just her? And another staple of all superhero films is the villains. And the villains in this film, how can I put this delicately? They suck. They are horrible in this film. And don't get me wrong, the big villain of all this is the complexities of war. It's the complexities of mankind and the inner struggle that Diana herself is going through. I understand that. However, you gave us villains. I'm going to judge the villains. These villains suck. As I said, this film is supposed to show off the horrors of war, the complexity of mankind, and yet these villains are walking cartoon characters with zero depth to them at all. You see Dr. Poison in the trailers and she's got that porcelain mask over her face to cover scars, and you might be thinking, oh, she's got some kind of a backstory. They're gonna get into that. They're gonna delve deep into her character. No, that's it. Her and her partner in crime have the complexity and backgrounds of Boris and Natasha as they try and capture Moose and Squirrel. Everyone in this film is trying to act serious. They're all trying to act real, and these two did not get the memo. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you can't have goofy villains. I'm not saying you can't have over-the-top villains. Heck, I actually liked Red Skull in the Captain America film, and that dude is goofy and over-the-top as hell. However, that entire film was supposed to be cheesy. That entire film was meant to be a modern-day version of one of those old 1940s superhero movies, and all of those were just covered in cheese. They were so goofy. This film is supposed to be serious, and these villains are just standing over there inhaling super drugs and going, "Mwahaha, mwahaha." And then when you go from that back to Diana looking at people starving and dying from war, yeah, it just feels weird, man. And there is a third villain who pops up at the end of this film, and they could have done something cool with them, but nah. You know how at the end of Batman vs. Superman, it felt like a fireworks factory just exploded? It feels like the special effects guys drank that 300th cup of coffee and lost their damn minds. Yeah, it feels like this film was going to try and do something different. It was going to try and be something where the big villain wasn't even really a villain. It was more of the situation. It was more of whether or not Diana could actually come to terms with the world around her, and it was going to try and be something so much more complex and mature than just some big spectacular blowout fight. And then it feels like that ending got crinkled up and thrown away, and then those same special effects guys from Batman vs. Superman snuck into the studio one night, rewrote their own ending, and then just let everything go nuts. Because the ending of this very serious, very fun, very different superhero film just turns into an Old Spice commercial.
Explosion!
Like, it seriously does not feel like the same people who did the last 15 minutes of this film did anything else on this film. Because as I said, I love how it went into every single character and really showed the rules of this world and how complex everything was. And then at the end of this film, it all starts off with Diana learning a secret about her past, and they don't really show the impact that has on her, because she just instantly goes into a huge fight. She has no time at all to deal with this. She doesn't even really think about that any at all after she's told this thing that should have changed her entire character. That should have been the kind of thing that you start at like the beginning of Act 3, when there's still half an hour left in this film, and she can kind of come to terms with that. Like, that gives her her moment of doubt that she has to rise up against again. But instead, she gets told this thing, and then bam, massive giant fireworks factory special effects goes on, and that's kind of it. And I mentioned how at the end of this film, she just gets like 10 new powers out of nowhere. I don't even know what these powers are. It's just giant lights circling around everywhere, making other lights dissolve and fighting against other lights and just eradicating stuff, and I don't even know where they are at the end of this. It starts with them at a location, but then everything just turns, like I said, into that battle at the end of Batman vs. Superman, where they're just on a big, open, empty wasteland where everything can happen. Seriously, I don't mean to hammer this point home, but it really does feel like a representative from Warner Brothers came down and just said,
"Where's the kaboom? There was supposed to be an earth-shattering kaboom."
And one last complaint. I've been reviewing this as a movie critic, but just speaking as a comic book fan, there is one massive problem I have with this film. There is something that they mention at the beginning of this film when they're giving you the origin of the Amazons, and then something that happens at the end of this film. And those two things together just make me look at this film and go, oh! So you just decided to take 90% of the stories that you could possibly tell with this character off the table. Just like all these different options for things you could do with Wonder Woman are just gone. You sure you don't even want to kind of hint that they could possibly still... No, you're just completely taking all options off the table? Okay, sure, whatever. So yeah, is it a perfect film? No. As I said, it's got problems here and there sprinkled all throughout, and they do kind of drop the ball there at the end. However, the good far outweighs the bad. I saw this 3 days ago. I'm already forgetting some of the problems I had with this film and remembering very fondly the things that I did like about this film. Plus, as I said, man, this is the very first ever Wonder Woman film, one of the 3 biggest heroes at DC Comics, one of the most recognizable heroes in the world, and this is the first giant live action film that she's ever gotten. They needed to get this one right. Heck, even beyond just the fact that it's Wonder Woman, it's the first big budget superhero film starring a leading female character. I said big budget and I said leading character. They needed to get this one right. And yeah, despite the few problems I had with it, they got it right. They pulled this off. And because of that, I have to give this film an 8 out of 10. Thanks for tuning into our review today. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought about Wonder Woman. And remember, you can check out our spoiler talk right over there. And you can always contact me on Twitter, Twitch, and Tumblr at Professor Thorgi. Thanks again, everyone. Come back next time.